Well, welcome to another episode of Anomalies. This is Anomalies number 80, and we have a special guest host today. Her name is Gwen Farrell. She's actually been a guest, I believe, on our show once, maybe twice. I think it's 2 times even. She's sitting in for Dan Hall today, my usual co-host, and if we're lucky, we're going to have Gwen be co-hosting multiple times in the future to cover for Dan or I, or even on with Dan and I at the same time. So welcome, Gwen Farrell, first of all.
Thank you.
Hello, Gwen.
And we do have two very interesting guests today. So we kind of got a full house here on the Zoom screen. The first is retired Lieutenant Jonathan Dover, who said it's fine to go by John. So we're going to call him John today. And then Sergeant Stan Milford, we can call him Stan too, recently retired. John said he retired in 2011, I believe, and then Stan 2022, so recently retired. They are, let me make sure I get this straight, Federal Rangers, both of you, on the Navajo Nation.
I'll let John field that.
Okay. Yeah, that's correct. We are a tribal organization at the time under the Navajo Nation. We were recognized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs as federal officers and had trained as such. So yeah, we did hold federal commission cards. We had enforced federal laws on the reservation there on Navajo.
And I should be correct in saying were, although you still hold that status. I mean, a retired status though, as of 2022 for Stan. So you had very, very serious jobs, federal law enforcement. Gwen was telling us that she knows both Stan and John, has talked with them on several occasions, and that they're some of the most reliable witnesses she's ever talked to. And that makes sense because that was their job. And so I'm always delighted to have someone who has that kind of stature, who wants to talk about the paranormal, because there are a lot of people, a lot of actors in these fields that are not as credible as two federal rangers. So we've got the witnesses and the people who can really back things up with evidence and with a very keen scientific eye. And that's what I really appreciate about having you two guys on here. So let me throw it over to Gwen, because she's the one who's talked with you in the past before, and just let her, ask what she wants to ask of you two.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, guys. So glad to have you here today. There are so many interesting points in the work that you did. I would kind of prefer to just sort of let you guys talk a little bit more about what you feel maybe were the most interesting things to you, or the things that you felt that were the most consequential in some way. However, I think it's always a good place to start is to start at the beginning when you're doing an interview, and you guys have done lots of these interviews. So perhaps if you could just tell our viewers and listeners how it is that you guys came to be Rangers, and how you came to be very specific Rangers. You didn't do what all the other people that you worked with did. You were involved in very specific investigations. And so if one or both of you would like to just give us a little bit of information, and how do you become someone who investigates paranormal activities?
Stan, you want to go ahead with this one?
You want me to start or you?
You go ahead, start.
Okay. Well, first of all, John and I started from the very beginning in law enforcement, from the police academy. And so you are selected to go to the academy, and you have to qualify to actually be chosen to go to the academy. And so after completing that and coming back, and the one thing that you said though there that is that we did do all of the other stuff that all of the other Rangers did. The Navajo Rangers are unique in that they're covering 27,000 square miles of reservation. That's the size of the state of West Virginia. And you have rangers covering all of the various natural resource protection, whether that's forestry, the agriculture, the archaeology, the wildlife, the parks and rec areas. So these rangers provide law enforcement over all of that area, and this is enforcing the tribal laws, but it's also enforcing some of the federal laws too. And with that being said, I'll let John kind of give his take on some of this.
Yeah, when I got into the police academy, I was given a piece of paper, a memo, that basically said, you'll attend the police academy. It'll be 6 months long, which is twice as long as most state academies. And we started out with 77, we graduated 32. During that time, we were trained as not only federal officers, tribal officers, but we had to be certified in Arizona State and New Mexico State. Eventually, we also became certified in Utah. And the training, once you got done, it just qualified you to be a ranger. So our general consensus was that it took 3 years of field work to finally become a ranger. It's not an overnight thing. Once you get the academy done, that's kind of like getting a college degree. You don't have any experience. And once you go out and get the experience and get more training as you go along, I had training in raptor identification and explosives, in archaeology, it just, accident investigation. I was a licensed EMT. So it just, at the end, by the time I retired, had about 4,000 hours of training behind me, on top of that with weapons training. So lots and lots of stuff to go through to do our job. We found out that officers from other agencies would come and join the Rangers, and they had a difficult time doing the stuff that we did because it was so complex.
Yeah, the just the sheer square acreage of that territory is very like you said, what, West Virginia? I mean, I guess I can't really picture West Virginia, a Northwest person my whole life, Washington State. I mean, but that's huge. And one of my questions I wanted to ask you is, did you deal with cases with livestock? And so it sounds like that's a pretty big part of the territories that you had jurisdiction over, or your activity in. Did you deal with some of the cattle mutilations and those, well, I guess cattle mutilation issue? Did you run across that? I guess don't answer that yet, but that's the first thing that comes up here. But what you said is that you had such a wide range of responsibilities, it sounds like. So was it Arizona, Nevada? You said a bit part of Utah?
It's actually New Mexico.
Oh, so, New Mexico, Arizona. Did you move into
Utah?
Utah, though. Okay, but not Nevada. Because Arizona is a hotbed for so much stuff.
Right.
Paranormal stuff.
Well, this entire region, this Four Corners region, that being Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and even now the Navajo Nation has lands in the state of Utah. I mean, Colorado, I'm sorry. They purchased some really large ranches there in the southern part of Colorado. So now all 4 states, the Navajo Nation has territorial reservation lands.
Mhm.
So
Okay, and then the Hopi territory, right? Is that mostly what states?
the Navajo reservation does encompass the entire Hopi reservation.
Okay,
The Hopi reservation is kind of centrally located within the Navajo reservation. Yes.
okay, and that, of course, that reservation has lots of I don't know if it's paranormal, but lots of legends, and it's kind of seems to be a hotbed for people looking to go investigating and discovering, and so that must have been interesting to have the Hopi land right in the middle of all that. But let's see, what was my other question? Roswell, of course, is something that you get involved in at all, talking about Roswell or investigating, because there's so many researchers that have had a part in those investigations. Is there, that's my first question to you both. Did you ever find connections to that alleged UFO incident?
Well, for me, I'll speak and say that the connection there is that the U.S. Indian Police Academy is in the southern part of New Mexico, in a town called Artesia. Artesia is not too far from Roswell. So when you're a young recruit and you're traveling out to Artesia, you're in that hotbed area of the Corona crash and the Roswell crash. And so, but for me and John, one of the things we early on, when we began doing presentations, there's an individual who lives here in Gallup, New Mexico. His name is Chuck Wade. And Chuck Wade's father owned Wade's Bar, or Wade Bar, in Corona, New Mexico. So it was Wade Bar where they supposedly took a box full of these pieces of the Roswell crash, and it was taken into the bar, and patrons inside the bar actually supposedly passed pieces of that craft around and touched it, and all of that. So me and John have been really fortunate to have made really good friends with Chuck Wade and his wife Nancy. They are close friends of ours, so we do kind of have some connection to that whole
peripheral connection.
Yeah,
it was so long ago that I wouldn't expect you to be investigating specifically.
no, that was long before.
I'm sure you come into contact with people who know something about it, who have stories about it, and so on.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll throw it back over to Gwen, and because I'm taking us off on tangents already. I know she's got her own questions, so go ahead and ask some, Gwen.
Okay, thank you.
Gwen,
Yeah,
before we get started,
sure.
can I give you an introduction regarding how the Rangers kind of got into the investigation of the paranormal, and kind of give people a kind of a background to that?
That would be perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And I'll have John jump in some of this. But the thing you must first realize is that John and I didn't jump up and volunteer to be the lead investigators for the paranormal for the Navajo Rangers. There was an incident that led up to the chief ranger at that time needing to address how our rangers approached dealing and investigating the paranormal cases or these supernatural cases. And I'll let John describe that incident with these younger Rangers and how we got appointed or assigned, delegated, directed to lead the Special Projects Unit. John?
Yeah, essentially what had happened, we had two young rookie Rangers that were riding together. If you knew these guys, we call them jokers. They're laughing, they're giggling, they're having an inside joke all the time. That's just how they were. And they got a call on a Bigfoot case, and they went up there. Grandma and Grandpa had a Bigfoot apparently take a sheep out of their corral, step back over and walk off with it. So they wanted somebody to take a look into it. These guys got up there and they're being themselves. They're, laughing and got their little inside jokes going and, just having a fun during the day. And the grandpa didn't like that. She thought that they were laughing about her and her call. So she called our director, Chief Ranger, and basically chewed him out as only a Navajo grandmother can. Which is, if you ever hear it, it's pretty bad, or it sounds bad. So our director called everybody in to a departmental meeting, and he just basically told everybody right there that from now on, any case like this is going to be investigated to the extent of your ability, and it will be treated seriously, and there'll be reports written on it. And then he turned to me and Stan, and I always like to tell people that we were voluntold. They turned around and he says, and you, John and Stan, are going to get the major cases and you're going to investigate them. And we kind of looked at each other like, what? Because you're always told never volunteer for anything. And so we got volunteered. After that, every time dispatch got a call, they'd send it to us, or a ranger would come in and say, hey, I got a UFO sighting over here, and here's the person that saw it. Can you guys look into it? So we started getting cases. We had maybe 60 to 80 cases a year of different types, from UFOs, hauntings, and Bigfoot cases, and of course the legendary Navajo skinwalker cases. And we investigated these to the best of our ability and we'd actually have to buy books and research and read up on these subjects, because we wanted to know which questions to ask and how to go about some of these investigations.
One of the early cases involved the sighting of a UFO and an individual who witnessed what he described as extraterrestrial beings. And going into that investigation, John and I had reached out to a Arizona state organization that is the largest international organization that deals with UFOs, that being the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. And this was the state and Phoenix organization that we reached out to. And so we reached out for their expertise in how they approach these cases. And for me and John, a lot of it is assimilating the what they're doing within their investigations and incorporating that into a law enforcement type of investigation.
Okay.
So
Good.
was
And-
it just, I'm sorry, Gwen, was it just luck of the draw that you guys got chosen, or had you given an indication that you might be more willing to look into the so-called paranormal and become the Paranormal Rangers? I mean, how did that work out? Did you show an openness towards those subjects, do you think, or was it just you happened to be there?
Well, I'll answer that. What happened was that you have to go into our backgrounds. Stan was born in Fort Defiance on Navajo Nation land. He grew up in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, with his mom over there, and spent a lot of years over there going to school and everything else. Meanwhile, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I would come out with my family every summer that I can remember. I think there's pictures of me as a baby out on the reservation. So we spent all our summers up in the Narbona Pass area. And so we didn't have the same, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? The same fear. Uh, you're traditionally, you're told you stay away from these things. You don't, if Bigfoot's out there, don't look at him, just leave him alone. Uh, if a UFO comes over, it might be one of the star people. It might be one of our gods that came to us, or Yebiche that came to us before. Um, Hauntings, you're even told traditionally, once somebody dies, you don't even speak their name anymore, because to speak their name is to ask that spirit to come back and be with you. And sometimes you don't want that. And with the Navajo skinwalker cases, there's a lot of built-in fear that comes along with that. And we didn't have that background in tradition, although we studied it and we learned what the traditions were so that we wouldn't offend people. But we didn't have that type of fear. The famous Bruce Lee once said in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, can you look at a situation without naming it? Naming it, making it a word, causes fear. So we went into these investigations with the idea that we were there to help somebody who may have been terrified at what they had seen or witnessed, and our ultimate goal was to be there for the people to help them.
The other thing was that the chief ranger at that time, he too was raised very traditionally, but as a child, he was taken and placed in the Mormon school system near Salt Lake City. So at least those three individuals, that being the chief, John, and myself, we had that where we were able to view any situation from two different perspectives, that being the Navajo traditional perspective, and then that of the Western non-native perspective. So I think that was serendipitous that occurred, because really that's what facilitated John and I to be able to form this, not necessarily the special projects unit, but to be able to investigate these things that people would refer to as paranormal or supernatural. We were already a part of the special projects unit in that we were doing dignitary protection, we were doing SWAT call outs, and a lot of other special investigations.
Okay. Thank you.
So nothing much scares you guys is what I conclude from that, which is a good quality to have. But I would I would venture to guess that something has freaked you out a bit, and Gwen kind of touched on that. I'm sure our audience would really love to get into the actual cases and your experiences. So why don't you follow that lead and go into, what really has freaked you out? What have you seen out there in your field of, investigation, your studies, your calls? What's out there that you still think about, years and years later?
Leading into that, I would like to say that John and I were very well trained in special weapons and tactics, or SWAT. And being a tactical operator, you go into these calls and these situations where obviously people are armed, they're threatening extreme violence. You can get in that situation, you can have rounds flying at you, being shot at.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't give in to that fear. You have to rely on your training to be able to get you to some type of resolve in that situation. So really you rely on your training and not so much the emotions. You try to be so well trained, whatever comes up, you can have some type of answer, a plan A and a plan B, and sometimes plan C in those situations, to never get painted into a corner, to always, I used to, as a firearms instructor, I used to always teach our rangers that never paint yourself into a corner, never, always have a way out in any situation. Because out on the Navajo reservation, at many times, John and I, our backup would be over an hour and a half away. So if you went into LA or Las Vegas or Phoenix, and you told those officers that your backup is an hour and a half away, that would totally just blow their minds, because in the metropolitan areas, your backup is minutes away, like within 2 or 3 minutes away at the most. So for us, it wasn't that way. You had to trust in your training to be able to get you through some of these situations. And it was the same with the paranormal. There were things, I had cases where I had a 12-inch butcher knife come flying off of a counter within just 1 or 2 feet in front of me, and went through a grapefruit in one of these fruit baskets that's hanging in a kitchen. So witnessing things like that, you have to keep your cool. You have to. And the other thing is, John and I have had, for me, since I was a child, I had a strong faith, and that's carried through till today, without question. And I think John is the same. So I'll let him speak some.
Yeah, when we got into these things, you don't think in terms of, oh my God, I'm going into this thing. You go in and you do what we always, in the SWAT team, with the police department, their motto is do what needs to be done. And, that's how we were trained. So if you don't do something, nobody else will. If somebody has something going on, you're there to investigate it, to determine what it is, or to tell them it's nothing. And we've done that before too. So you take it pragmatically, you go through the numbers, do what you can, collect your evidence. And at the end, with some of these cases, you step back and you go, whew, wow, did I just go through that whole thing? But during the time that you do it, you're not thinking that way. You're focused on the things that you need to do, and you don't think about it till later on. And then we'll talk about it, and we'll say our prayers and smudge ourselves or smoke ourselves in the traditional way. And that way we can maintain that balance in our lives.
I would like to ask, over the years that you guys were active doing this kind of work, about what percentage of the cases that you did were this type of paranormal or anomalous event, as opposed to the ones that were just like normal police investigation and police work?
I'll let John field that.
Yeah, we handled so much. Like I said, I was a specialist in archaeological investigations, hazardous materials. I was a operational first responder for hazmat. Um, I was a EMT. I also was the instructor for high angle technical rescue and with ropes and stuff like that. And then I was a firearms instructor. Uh, that being said, uh, all the stuff that we did paranormal wise represents less than 1% of our entire duties. Uh, so, 60, 70 cases a year. That's we had so much going on, and we'd have to, stop what we were doing and go do a paranormal case, and then
Hmm.
give it as much information as we can, get all the reports written, turn them in. They got locked down in the system so that nobody else could just peruse through and look at them. And then we go back to our regular duties. And so our days tend to average 14 hours a day.
So it's
One
pretty
of the
rare,
other things
very
I'd
rare.
like to make a comment is that when we would have these paranormal or supernatural events going on and cases come up, that for me, it would seem that they would go in cycles, kind of on a bell curve, in that sometimes you would have reports of case after case after case after case just flooding in. And then other times there would be long periods of nothing coming in. And of course, there can be a lot of different variables that come into play there. The fact that people are reporting their contact or their incident to an agency like us, or what we were. One of the unique things is that, how we're communicating right now using cell phone technology and the internet and social media. I think that's played a huge, huge role in, and especially on the Navajo reservation and within the Navajo people, the tribal people, to be able to convey their experience to others, where maybe in the past, because of tradition, you didn't allow yourself to share that. John and I have talked to elderly people, tribal people in their 80s, that have come up to us after one of our presentations, and this has occurred several times. But to have an elderly person come up to you to hug us and say, thank you for doing what you do as far as conveying or presenting this information. And they would go on to tell us about their own personal experience as a young person, as a child or teenager. And to have their family members standing around with their jaws wide open because they've never heard that experience from that elder person. Simply either from tradition, not talking about it, or the fear of being ridiculed, or, for people to talk about, oh, are they crazy, or are they, those kind of things. But today, I think we're in a very unique situation today where because I can get on that cell phone. And of course, you guys are a long distance from me, but we're talking like we're face to face. I can be talking to someone in Scotland instantaneously. I can be talking to someone in the Philippines instantaneously. And so it allows people that have these experiences in whatever type of phenomena to share that with others, either with social media or with internet and texting and calls. You know, it's a really unique situation. People can capture real-time video of objects in our skies, you know, and so it's really unique. And today it just seems like you see more and more and more reports of people sharing sightings of UFOs and different types of paranormal stuff. So,
Well, I've got a question. You kind of left us with a cliffhanger there, Stan, with the knife knife flying through the air in front of you. So I
yeah,
know our audience will want to hear more about that incident as well as some other specific incidents. But you brought up an interesting issue, and that's possibly different belief systems within native populations and non-native populations. Do you think there is? I mean, there probably is. What's your opinion on the differences in belief systems in terms of how seriously it's taken? Because I may be wrong, and correct me if I am, but would the Phoenix, Phoenix Police Department or Santa Fe or whoever, would they have designated officers dealing with, quote, paranormal stuff? I mean, is that something that is common in a police department? Or is that something that was born of a different belief system among Native people? A more accepting belief system, I guess.
Okay, I'll answer that. The Navajo people have a history of unusual things happening around them. They have always seen craft in the sky, even back in the 1817, 1600s. There's recordings in the oral traditions of sky beings flying in and imparting information. There are, and as a result of that, you have in Navajo culture, you have the Abichi dancers, which are representations of those sky people. In the Hopi culture, you have Kachinas, which are considered sky people. The same with the Zuni. Now, you get into this idea that there's reports, oral history of Bigfoot having been around since the late 1600s when the Spanish came through. The Navajos acquired horses, and they were using those, and they ran into Bigfoot. And they said that they roped him using horsehair lariats. And he sat down in the middle of these horses with all these lariats holding him in the middle. And as he sat down, he spoke to them. And the natives said that he spoke to them in their own language. And I don't think it was a situation where he was actually speaking Navajo. I think he was able to use telepathic communication with them and make them understand. And it told those Navajos, if you will take me to Mesa Verde, this is north of Gallup where they're at. If you'll take me up to Mesa Verde and let me go, I will not return this way again. And so they rode with him. He was walking in between them, and they rode all the way to Mesa Verde like that and let him go. So these are the stories that are in the history that the Navajo medicine men know about. So it's not unusual for them. I had a situation where a young lady went to see her grandmother, and the grandmother's weaving in a hogan with a dirt floor. The door is open, and the young girl sees uh, about a 6 or 7 foot disc that's hovering in the doorway, and the shadows coming in. And she got really excited and she says, "Grandma, Grandma, look, look," you know. And the grandmother looked and she said, "Oh, don't worry about that. They're always around here." And went back to weaving like it was nothing. And so we ask um, residents out here all the time, why don't you report these cases to someone like MUFON or somebody else that handles these things? And they tell us consistently that we don't want a lot of people coming up here to look into this, because then those craft, those UFOs will not come back anymore. And if you look at the connection that they have traditionally, they don't want their gods being driven off.
Mhm.
Thank you.
There's a fundamental difference in belief system and openness in terms of the inclusion of what we're calling paranormal into our cultures. And again, this is a serious question. Would Phoenix Police Department or Santa Fe or Seattle or Los Angeles, would they have designated officers looking into this, or would that be too crazy to have somebody,
One
looking?
of the things that you must
Yeah.
consider is that this being the Navajo reservation, that's a Native American culture.
Mhm.
And so the entire culture is interwoven with where you have medicine men conducting healing and sometimes what appears to be miraculous
Mhm.
incidents through the use of those traditional healing methods. So that's ingrained already within the tribe. The other thing you have is the traditional teachings and the creation stories from an indigenous peoples, like you have with the Aztecs and the Mayans and these other indigenous groups that have a creation story. And so when you get into issues and subject matter like witchcraft and the practice of when people perform shape shifting or skinwalking, that's already a part of the culture. So out there, let's say in Phoenix PD, unless you have officers that come from that cultural background, in general, they won't have that. I mean, and John and I have traveled to places like Scotland and we've talked to many, many people. The unique thing there is that it's really not unique, because in every culture they have, like with the shape shifting and the skinwalkers, they have stories like lycanthropy in Europe, the werewolves.
Mhm.
And in some of those villages, that's just as real to them as the shape shifting is out here with different indigenous tribes. The talk about the Hopis and the little people that they describe. Well, when we were in Scotland and we talked to people from Ireland, they talked about their little peoples you know, and so no matter where you're at in the world, you know, there's so many common things that occur here that also occur on the other side of this planet, whether that's the Bigfoot or Sasquatch or, you know, the Yowies in Australia, you know, Yetis, that describe almost an identical being in description and form.
Yeah.
So,
Sounds like you don't have the ridicule factor though, which is very important, which gave you a chance to actually investigate something seriously without feeling that you would be laughed at or, you know, ignored or whatever. Because I could see that happen, especially in the US. I mean, let's face it, we don't have much of a history. We've only been around for a couple hundred years, right? I mean, the country itself. And we have a very strong scientific community that is very antagonistic towards a lot of this stuff. We have a lot of media pressure. They throw it on at the end of the last minute of the newscast and have a little ha-ha piece about aliens or Bigfoot
yeah,
or whatever. But in general, it's such skepticism. I wouldn't even call it skepticism. It's pseudo skepticism. It's not taking it seriously from the get-go, you know. So I just find it refreshing that you and John were able to go out there and actually investigate something. Sure, it was 1 in every 100 jobs, you know, or calls, but you were allowed to do it and it was taken seriously. That's what's refreshing to me in this case. So,
the
sorry.
one thing is that Chief Butler at the time was the chief ranger. Really, he needs to be credited in that it was him that said, giving a directive to the rangers, ranger sergeants, lieutenants, saying that for these people that are having these supernatural or paranormal experiences, you may not believe in it, you may not understand it, but you will investigate it and you will be professional. Because to these individuals that are experiencing this, whether it's a 10-year-old little girl being chased by a Bigfoot or an 80-year-old grandmother having a Bigfoot taking one of her sheep, to them it is very real. And in most of the cases that John and I investigated, the individual, the reporting person, complainant, in most cases was traumatized by the event that they experienced. So John and I, having gone through the police academy, at that time, they ingrained in us that as a law enforcement officer, you're in there for one of two reasons. And that is either to help people or to protect people. And if you're in law enforcement for any other reason, you might as well be going and flipping burgers because you're in it for the wrong reason. So John and I, even today, John and I aren't in law enforcement anymore, but we still actively deal with these paranormal events. When we're contacted and asked for help, we don't turn people away. So that's just a part of who we are.
And we don't get paid for it either.
No, no.
Would you guys like to share with us? I'm sure you have had some very interesting experiences, and so I'm certain also that certain of them meant something to you for particular reasons. And so I'm sure they were all interesting and things that we would like to hear about. But are there particular events that you experienced? And I would also kind of like to direct you in the direction of Sasquatch, if you would like to take a few minutes at some point to talk about that. But any events that you've had that you can share with us that would help us to understand a little bit more about what you faced over the years and the knowledge that you must have acquired after experiencing all these things.
I could jump into that if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
So throughout the period that John and I investigated these cases, there were numerous cases involving what people would refer to as a Bigfoot. And so one of the unique things with the Bigfoot was that you would arrive out on scene and you would see clear evidence of tracks of this thing walking. And sometimes, you know, they may be 100 yards or it may be miles. But in looking at the corridor or pathway of where this thing walked, you wouldn't have any outside disturbances. And they would start at one point and they would end at another point. And these things may have traversed, you know, some canyons and up a mesa face, over places where John and I wouldn't even be able to walk, you know, without being aided by ropes or whatever. So, having witnessed this and also actually being in the field and actually witnessing what people are describing as a Bigfoot, at least twice on one investigation, and then another time when I was patrolling, I did have where I witnessed one of these things that people describe larger than an adult man, covered in hair, and but the thing that I don't agree with some people is that this thing is living like a bear does, or mountain lion or cougar out in our forest. John and I have lived out in those forests at times on assignments and patrols, and there's just no evidence to support that this thing, being 700 to over 1,000 pounds, 7 or 8 foot tall, is actually living out there. This thing would have to be consuming somewhere between 3 and maybe 5,000 calories to support that body mass. And it would be leaving scat piles out in our woods that would be extremely obvious. And that's not occurring from what we see. So in that, and along with information from other types of paranormal cases, it suggests that these things that people are referring to as Bigfoot are actually an interdimensional type of being or creature or animal, but not that they're living within our forest areas here on this planet. And I'll let John talk some.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things that we did, in our investigations, we'd photograph, measure, put a ruler down next to the photo. We'd also take steps to do plaster casting. which is an art form all to itself. We would also track it. And when we're doing our measurements, we're looking at stride distances, heel to heel, how big the stride is. In one case, we had a stride distance of 5 feet. 5 feet, to do a stride of 5 feet for myself, I would have to literally do the splits. And I can't do the splits. maybe back in my younger days, but yeah. So and this thing's walking for miles like that. And it's going up 40-degree slopes of dirt. And we're pin flagging it where it walked and photographing it. We track it and the tracks disappear. The tracks disappear in what we call trackable ground, where if it had taken another step, it would have left an impression. Once you lose the track like that, you start circling. You start what they call casting for the next track, even if it's a pebble that's pushed down in the soil. You're looking to find that track again and continue on, and you don't find it. You track it back the other direction. The tracks appear in trackable ground, but there's no track further than where it first starts. So we have this idea that that these things aren't from here. We haven't found its bones. We haven't found its bed. We found evidence of it being here, but there's nothing else.
Very interesting. Did you have reports of people having communication with or from these creatures?
We've had reports of people that have encountered them close up. In some cases, they tell us that Navajos are told traditionally, don't look at it in the eyes, because if you look at the eyes, it can take control of your mind. And so they're told, don't look at it. But we've talked to people that have seen it up close, and they said it had yellow eyes. And it was just frightening. They got this feeling of fear immediately, which in an unusual situation is normal. But we hear this over and over, that people feel very uneasy even when they don't see it. They get this feeling of terror, and they don't know why. We came to the idea that it may be using what they call infrasound, which is a form of sound that's so low, like an elephant, that you cannot hear it. Our auditory abilities are so limited within just a short, span of being able to hear. Just like our vision, we can't see into the X-ray, and we can't see into the infrared. We see a very, narrow section for visual. So there's a lot that we're probably missing out there. And we think that infrasound is coming through, and it's creating some kind of disassociation with the brain, where it just kind of goes haywire a little bit, and it's interpreted as fear.
That's good. Probably very wisely. It's just like, turn around now. If you know what's good for you. So I know that I've heard many experiencers, people who have come close to craft, to otherworldly craft that's crashed or landed on the ground, who speak about sound and how one moment they step towards it and everything is fine, and they take a second step and suddenly they are just flooded with terror. It's like almost an instantaneous thing. They don't even have time to think, gee, I probably should be afraid here. No, it just happens. And so could that possibly be something similar perhaps the Bigfoot has a natural thing, or maybe it has a technology. But it also seems to make sense. If these people want to keep you away from their stuff, they just make you really scared so that you run.
One
So,
of the other
What?
things that I look at is that I really feel that as a human being, I I feel we have all different types of abilities, whether that's to heal our body, to rid it of diseases, to be able to communicate by thoughts. Uh, you look at some of these yogis, these Indian yogis that can control their body and their breathing to the point that they're clinically dead. They're not breathing outright like you or I. They can be even encased in glass with no air in there, yet they're still alive. They can perform these superhuman abilities and feats. And I really feel we all, every one of us has those abilities. We simply do not know how to tap into those abilities. And uh, I think that we all, having worked with John on these paranormal investigations, I think we all have what is referred to as a sixth sense or gut instinct that you see, in many instances in our lives in the news, you hear of people performing these, like saving their child or lifting a car or things like this. And, but that sixth sense, I think, is we all have that. And I think it's there to be able to protect us from harm and from danger. And I know, like with me and John, we can go out on an investigation of this kind of nature. And as I get close to where the target area is, or the residence or the building or whatever, I can start approaching that and I can start getting some type of sense of energy that's involved here, whether it's a positive energy or negative energy, or and especially actually entering that space, I can pick up if that's a negative or evil energy, or it becomes very clear. I don't know if that's a learned thing after John and I having worked doing this kind of stuff so often that I have developed my ability to be able to detect those kind of things, or not, kind of like uh, being able to be sensitive though to those kind of things. I don't know, but I think we all have that ability. I mean, even you hear of some children uh, reacting to a certain situation that they're put in and following that gut instinct that protects them. And the same with the elderly too. So even animals have used their senses in certain ways. You hear about people having maybe a lap dog, maybe that lap dog is growling and barking at somebody, and people will say, yeah, he can sense evil or whatever, a bad person or bad personality. And I think that's true. I think animals can sense that positive and negative energy and react to it. And I think also, like what John said, animals have extended uh, vision capabilities far beyond what man has, and even with the hearing and all of these other senses, smell, So um, I think we do have those abilities to, in certain situations, to you know, John and I would be out on a SWAT call or something where weapons are involved and stuff, and you learn to trust in that gut instinct. I would say it's probably kept us alive numerous times in certain situations, following that gut instinct.
I'm sure it has. Yeah. I would like to ask about another part of this phenomenon that I suspect that you guys have experienced. And when you start to look into paranormal events, by talking with a lot of people who've experienced these things, hearing what they have to say, then one of the things that seems to come up is that some people believe that when they have certain experiences, or anomalous experiences of some kind, that those kinds of experiences can stay with them. So almost like if some kind of energy or something sort of attaches to a person. And there are people who have described that, where they've had different kinds of experiences with one particular one I'm thinking of is Skinwalker at the Pentagon, a book which talks about this Skinwalker Ranch. And I wonder if you guys were ever in a situation where you found something sort of stuck to you, that kind of followed you back to your home or followed you back to the office, that you could share with us.
Okay, I'll get started with this and I'll let Stan talk about his deal. For me, my first, well, I won't say it's my first, my second UFO sighting was in 1984. And I had just started working with the City of Winslow, Arizona Police Department, and I was working the graveyard shift. So one night, me and my ex-wife were on our way back, and we traveled down I-40 till about between Twin Arrows and Two Guns and go north, about 6 miles into the reservation. So we're on a dirt road. We get near the railroad tracks. We lived maybe a half a mile away from the tracks and see and hear trains, you know, coming through all the time. And as we're driving through there, I had a Volkswagen Bug, an orange one. And as we're going, we saw a light above the tracks shining down. It was almost a collimated beam of light, very intense, shining down in front at an angle on top of the tracks. This craft was cigar shaped and it was very large, maybe 200 yards long. And there were no other lights on it. And you could see basically see the outline in the dark. It was making a huge noise, just this heavy, heavy machinery noise, this, you know, rum, 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 like that. But it was, you know, so loud that it just goes through your body. I stopped maybe about 150 yards away. And I remember the X-Files having just come out about that time. And I remember getting out and shutting the car off, turning the lights out, getting out of the car and standing there watching this thing. And I was literally, I remember looking at my time, looking at my watch and you know, indicating to me, you know, okay, I got out at this time. I don't know why, but that's what they did in the TV show. I'm standing there watching this thing and I'm filled with curiosity. If it had landed, I think I would have walked up to it and knocked on the door and said, "Can I have a ride?" It was heading from east to west toward Flagstaff area, toward the cinder cones. And my ex was screaming at me, "Get back in the car, get back in the car." And I was just standing there going, wow, this is cool, you know. And I watched it. It was only traveling about 15 miles an hour. And it went off into the distance with the sound going away as it went. And shortly after, I finally got back in the car and we drove the rest of the way back to the house. When we got to the house, I stopped the car, turned it off. We saw a shooting star go across the sky. And it's pretty common out there, and there's no lighting, so everything is really bright. And she jumped out of the car and she screamed, "They're coming back," and ran into the house. And I'm sitting there going, "Oh, it's just a shooting star." Uh, but that was one of my first encounters with these craft. Later on, I have had numerous encounters with discs, with orbs, with triangles, with squares, seeing them so often. At some point, I started experiencing missing time incidences. You're driving along, you're going down the road, you pass a location and you think, okay, I only got 10 minutes to get home because I recognize that landmark. And you go by it and you keep driving and driving and driving for it seems like another 30 minutes. And then you suddenly pass that location again. And you're looking around going, hey, what the heck? What happened here? I've had those kind of things happen to me so often that I finally got me a dash cam and I put a video camera in the windshield. And ever since I did that, I don't have any cases of missing time. I'm happy to say, or at least none that I can remember. And I don't have any uh, visual sightings of any UFOs anymore because
Interesting.
my dash cam I upgraded it now. I've got a 4K dash cam in the front and a 1080p dash cam in the rear, and so I can get it going and coming.
Mhm.
So I want to see if that thing shows up. Uh, I want it on video.
Mhm.
So, but I haven't seen one since. So,
Oh,
and that's okay with me.
good, good. Yeah. Stan, I think you had something you were going to share.
Um, as far as the UFO stuff,
Tell them about the haunting case.
okay. Um, I had mentioned an incident with a butcher knife that came out of a butcher block full of knives. That was a part of a case that I had where um, there was an office space where there were employees on the Navajo reservation that they were reporting um, all kinds of different phenomena within that office setting. And so their director came to the chief ranger and she explained to him that, my employees are reporting these strange activities and things like that going on in the workspace, and it's disrupting everyday work. Do you have somebody that can come over and take a look and validate, what's going on? And so chief came to me and met with me, and he explained, the information he had, and I was assigned to go in and investigate it. So again, this is one of those types of investigations that's not your typical law enforcement investigation. So I put together a team of 4 individuals, myself and 3 other individuals that had a background that would lend to that kind of investigation. There was a person that was from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a good friend of mine, who was well versed in different paranormal investigation. There was a local individual whose background is in audio visual uh, technologies and the whole IT stuff. So him. And then there was another individual who actually worked in that building who he had what looked like a ring of jail keys, like a jailer. I bet he had 30 different keys on that ring. And so he wanted to be a part of it too, having worked in that building. And that was, so it worked out. And so we go into the building and for 2 days. And when I first went in, I walked through the building, which there's 3 levels in that building. There's a lower basement area. That basement area has a poured concrete floor. And then there's the main level that is ground level, is the main part of the office. And then there's even a higher up area, rooms that were on another level. So when me and the guy with the keys first arrived on that first night, we did a walkthrough of the building so I could get a sense of where I wanted to set up the investigation. What we would do is, in the lower part of that building, there was a long conference room table, long oval table. And I thought this would be a good place for us to set up our laptops for each of us, and to be able to have equipment running to the computers. And so as I was standing there leaning against that conference table, it was as though somebody took their finger and rubbed it from one side of my mustache to the other side and then back across. And it was, the pressure was just as though somebody had put their finger on my upper lip. And so as I was standing there and I felt that, about 5 seconds later, maybe about 5 feet to my left, there was a conversation between 2 individuals speaking to each other. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was definitely 2 different male voices that were talking to each other. So as the other 2 individuals arrived, we all got together down there. And I told them, for that opening briefing, that what I had experienced. And almost immediately following that, the most unique phenomenon in all of that investigation to me was a phenomenon called an apport, where you have an actual physical object that will manifest or materialize out of thin air, or it'll disappear, or in this case, it was coins. We would have regular US denomination coins, quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies, that would materialize out of thin air where there's nobody there, and it would appear and fall on the floor. Or sometimes they would come flying across the room. Sometimes they would hit us, not with a velocity that could injure you, but it could definitely get your attention. And so over 2 days, there was over 65 coins that materialized. And with at least 10 of those, I witnessed with my own eyes where these coins would fall out of thin air into the floor. And one of the unique things with the coins was that in that lower basement area, you had a poured concrete floor. So when you would drop a coin on it, you could hear that coin from a long ways away. And they would behave like a regular coin. If you pulled a coin out of your pocket, flipped it into the air, they would hit, maybe make a big arc, come around, get closer in, spin around, and then fall. Out of all the 65 coins, every single one of them landed heads up. So you and I know, in statistics and probability, that's not possible. That's not going to happen naturally. without some type of intervention. And but to actually witness that with my own eyes, our modern science and physics would say, oh, that's not possible to do for that to happen. But I've seen it with my own eyes, so I know it can happen. So that was one of the most, I would say, kind of
Intense.
life-changing, in that it allowed you to view what you know of science and things is out the window. And having seen those things with your own eyes and with your own experience.
Mhm.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was going to say intense.
Oh,
And
Can
and this
imagine.
and this phenomenon followed Stan home.
yeah.
Mm.
It's still
Oh,
here today.
is that true?
Yeah, it still happens
Okay.
today, and it can happen anywhere. Not too long ago, I was in a Love's truck stop to get a breakfast muffin, and I was standing there near the cash register. There was another person in front of me, and there was me and another individual standing there. And as we were standing there, a coin fell in front of us out of nothingness. There was nothing there. And I know he's seen it because he turns to me and looks at me, and his eyes are really big. And I looked at him. I reached down, I leaned over, and I picked up the coin and I put it in my pocket. And he's standing there with this look of shock that what he just witnessed. But for me, it just happens, and it does. I mean, it happens even in my home. It's happened numerous times in my home. And but I've been told I've sought medicine men, traditional Navajo medicine men, their interpretation of that or understanding of that, other spiritual healers, and even myself. I told you about the sixth sense. I've never had that negative energy or negative sense associated to those coins. I've analyzed the coins as far as the years, the metal makeup, all of these different things, factors with the coins, but I've come to realize myself that it is some type of energy or spirit or conveying to me, heads up, I'm here. That's why the coins always land heads up. And
That's why they land heads up.
they continue to land heads up even today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
We're pushing up against an hour and a half, so I want to be cognizant of everybody's time here. I think we should finish up pretty quickly here, but I have to ask for both of you, a question for both of you, Stan and John. Did you, as younger people, have experiences yourself prior to becoming paranormal rangers? Did you have an affinity, for any of this stuff? Did your family had histories of sightings of either Sasquatch or UFOs or any other sort of paranormal stuff? Or is this just all something you kind of happened upon later in life? For both of you that have that question.
Okay, I'll start with that. For me, growing up, I can remember back as far as junior high, where I saw what you would describe as a red orb of light moving through the trees, weaving back and forth. Um, my grandmother, my grandfather wanted to get out and shoot at it. It was like 2 a.m. Up in the mountains. My grandmother was screaming at him, "You leave it alone," because she said it was a skinwalker.
Mm.
So I had that experience. The other thing is I've had occasions of deja vu for most of my life. These things I would dream about a year later. Uh, I would be in a situation and say, I've been here before. I know exactly what's going to happen. I know what exactly somebody's going to say. Um, and you kind of just stand there and let it happen with this idea that, wow, I had a dream about this a year ago. It's exactly the same thing. And it saved my life one time. I was going down the road. I remember right then I flashed on it that I dreamed about this. My truck was upside down, and I was trying to think, and I'm hanging from the seatbelt, trying to think, how am I going to explain this? I hit a bunch of horses. And just as I had that thought, I let off on the accelerator, and in front of me and in behind me in the mirror, I could see a herd of horses run through, and I was in the gap in the middle of them, and I
Wow.
didn't hit anything.
Wow.
And I'm doing 65 miles an hour. And of course, I'm doing the speed limit because police officers always obey the law. And
Okay.
this happens, and I think, hey, to me, it's almost like sliding down a half pipe, and you're heading in the direction, but you can make minor adjustments and slide up the half a little bit and change things, but you can't change the direction.
Mm.
Very interesting. Yes. What about you,
Yeah.
Stan? Did you have any encounters as a younger person that you know
Not so much when I was young. Um, it wasn't until I was older. My mother had purchased an older home that was built like I believe it was built in the 30s. Yet a lot of it had been modernized and renovated. But me and my younger sister experienced things in that home. One of the events, real quick, was we were home alone, and for like a couple of days, I'm 5 years older than her, and I'm looking after her. And in that home, in the kitchen, it had one of these older range stoves, the type that has the big knobs, and they're kind of tough to turn. Plus, you have to take a wooden match and light those kind of burners. And we were there in the front part of that living room on that house, and as it got dark, as we were watching TV, I noticed a light toward the kitchen. So I got up and I went down there, and all four of those burners were lit and turned on. I hadn't done it, and my younger sister, she wouldn't even mess with that kind of thing without me being there to do that. So things like that, there were a number of events and incidents that would definitely fall under that paranormal thing. I did later on at college age experience firsthand one of these things that people witness as a skinwalker running by my vehicle at highway speed, and actually seeing this thing firsthand with my own eyes. And so there was a few events like that I had prior to becoming a ranger, but I didn't really have a strong curiosity in necessarily the paranormal, but I did have a curiosity in how things work, the science and stuff. So anyway.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
you had an open-mindedness about it, that that may have just been more natural for you, just in your culture and upbringing anyway. But it sounds like you both did have some experiences that you remember from many years later, which I think it's a kind of a tricky question. We always ask our guests that, and most of them say yes. And I don't know if it's because you're here to talk about the paranormal, or if it's just very common for most of us to have some sort of incident in the past, or several incidents, which kind of shows how common this really is. It's hidden a little bit more in a lot of, especially the non-native culture. For the most part, it's hidden. We don't talk about it still, and that's what I find interesting about the Navajo, and other Native American cultures, is that it is, like you have said multiple times tonight, it's very much ingrained in the culture. And I think that's why it's important to speak with people like you who come from the culture and also have worked in it and studied it scientifically as you can. Some of this stuff is very hard to study. It won't sit still for us in a lab or anything like that, unfortunately. But you can gather evidence, and you can build up very convincing, compelling evidence, even just from testimony itself. So how many witnesses do you think you interviewed over those years when you were part of this Paranormal Ranger team? I mean, is it dozens, hundreds, thousands? How many people do you think you talked to?
I would say in the hundreds.
So a very significant number of people who I assume were very credible and serious, and probably not at all eager to talk about some of this stuff if it made them potentially look silly or whatever. But you probably talked to many different types of people and different situations. Before we let you go, you touched on Skinwalker a couple times, so I want to hear your experiences with this Skinwalker entity or this concept. Just a quick kind of overview of those experiences from both of you.
I'll let
Okay.
John explain what that is and
Okay.
the kind of background.
Okay, real quickly, and I know it's a big subject. It's a long subject, but
Yeah.
we're just going to touch on it.
Yeah.
Very complex.
Yeah, very complex. The Navajo Skinwalker, and that's the one I'll speak to. Other tribes all across the United States and even in Arizona have different versions of this. But the Navajo Skinwalker is somebody who has asked for that power, or what they called in the past ANTI, and it was something that was given by to first man and first woman, but later on it became used for evil purposes. The ability to change your shape. They use the skin of an animal, and they can change into any animal they want as long as they have the skin to it. I recently was at the International UFO Congress and speaking in a workshop, and I mentioned that on the Hopi reservation, a person was seen on the side of the road that was the lower half was a kangaroo and the upper half was a man. And after we got done with the workshop, a Navajo family came up to me, and the girl was going, "Oh my God!" She says, either I know the woman that told that to you, or I know another person that saw it because they told me about it too." And we think that they're using the DNA from the hides to affect these changes. They can also change into representations of you if they obtain your DNA. So we're told as young children that you don't leave your fingernail clippings laying around. You don't leave your hairbrush laying around. If you do number one or number two, you cover it up. Things like that. You don't leave sweaty clothes laying outside, because one of these things can get your clothing and change into somebody that looks like you and approach other people and deliver poison or injury. They are not bulletproof. They are not avatars. These are real people. They've attained this ability by basically sacrificing somebody that's very, very close to them. And so we don't take any chances with this. Um, it's very serious. We will not take film crews out to look for them. Um, you know, none of that stuff. And we've actually had seen people injured because of being in the vicinity of them. So very, very serious stuff. They can kill you. So if I were people out there listening to this, I would not in any way say to go out and look for one of these
Mm.
because it could be fatal.
Thank you. Thanks for the warning.
Pretty pretty disturbing, yes, but I'm sure you've seen all kinds of things out there. Some of the phenomena, unfortunately, like you said, the human related ones are probably more violent than the other types of phenomena that you run across. And that brings me to my last question, then I'll let you guys go for tonight. What is your theory about what's going on? Is there a common thread between, say, Sasquatch, um, aliens, or other entities, um, little people? We talked about, gnomes and fairies and so on. They all seem to have this trickster element, especially Stan's talking about the coins out of thin air. To me, that's almost like a parlor trick, right? I mean, it's very simple, but it served the purpose of giving Stan a heads up, which is very clever too. But there's this trickster aspect to a lot of this phenomenon. And I'm wondering if that's something in Navajo culture and maybe other Native American cultures, if they include the idea of this archetype of the trickster. How does that play into your lore and your culture?
Okay,
One thing,
I'll start. I'll start and
yeah,
I'll let Stan finish. Um, in Navajo culture, there is a trickster. There is a coyote who is spoken of in the right from the start. They came in the Navajo creation story. They came through different worlds, and in each world, they came through a hole in the sky. In the last world, the fourth world, they came into this world, what they call the shining world, and they saw a hole in the sky, and they put something up there to crawl up into it. And as a people, they went into it and came into this world in what they call Deneta, or the place of emergence. So that's located up in the Four Corners region. Now, me and Stan have been proposing this ever since about 2009, because as criminal investigators, we look for why and how, and we want those questions answered, and we do a lot of overtime thinking about this. We came to the idea that these things are all interrelated through the use of parallel dimensions. These are dimensions that coexist one on top of the other as proposed in string theory and physics. Um, the idea is that there could be as many as a dozen, there could be as many as an infinite number. They all exist in different frequencies. So they're right on top of each other, and we think that sometimes these dimensions overlap each other and things can come through inadvertently. We've actually had reports up in Utah of small dinosaurs showing up
Hmm.
and walking around the creek. Uh, and what they're describing is something that looks like a small raptor of some kind, maybe about 3 feet tall. Uh, we've had UFOs that just pop into existence with a loud pop and do whatever they're going to do, and then maybe 20 minutes later just fade out and disappear. So even Nikola Tesla said that you have three things, 369 theory, that you have this idea of energy, frequency, and vibration. And if you are able to control these three things, you can do anything. So, we looked at that and we said, hey, that kind of fits because the Navajos could have come through a dimensional gate to this world and populated it. The stories of giants, of animals that could talk, all this stuff, and the twins, the giant slayers. Um, we run into situations where Bigfoot disappears, and so and there's also a correlation, believe it or not, in Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings that are reported to us that we saw increases in both at the same time and then decreases in both. So there's definitely a connection there. And so I'll let Stan talk to the rest of this.
With the phenomenon of the coins apporting or appearing out of thin air, there was an epiphany on my part, or a light bulb that went on above my head, where that's when I realized that that was the common thread, as you said, with all of these different things. The Bigfoot, it's not out there living in the woods. It is crossing over into our physical dimension. People will witness this, multiple people will witness this, and all of a sudden it's gone and it crosses back over. Same with UFOs, either in our atmosphere or landing. They're here and then they also cross back over. That's also a technique that's used by these shapeshifters, where they will come into our physical world at one point, cross over, travel great earthly distances instantaneously, but come out miles away somewhere else by traveling through these dimensions. So that's the commonality.
Yeah, in closing, I think this is just the introduction episode.
Oh yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
lots more to talk about.
So much more.
Before we go, I would like to ask one final question, and that is, I understand that there is a book that is happening. You guys together or separately are preparing something for publication. Would you care to give us an introduction to that?
I'll let John tell how that came about.
Yeah, for everybody's information, we've been asked about a book for a long time. Both me and Stan have started writing our memoirs, I guess, and we've gotten so far with it. But when you're writing, it's not an easy thing. And I found out for myself that I write like I write a report, just the facts, man. And and I have to kind of go back and interject. How did I feel? What did I think? You know, was it hot that day? Was I sweating? Things like that. And just to kind of round it out and make it more realistic for people to understand what I was doing. And we were contacted after we appeared on a Netflix, Unsolved Mysteries, season 3, episode 5. If anybody's interested,
Paranormal Rangers.
Yeah, Paranormal Rangers. You'll find me and Stan on there. And we were contacted by a publisher who asked us if we could submit some of our stuff to them, and they'd go over it, and they think that we've got a good product. So we're going to continue to work with them. But for me, I don't know about Stan, but I got about 47 chapters outlined, and I've only completed maybe 15 to 18 of them, and I'm still working on the rest. So it's an uphill battle. Stan's working on his own.
So they're untitled as yet, or in pre-publication, or whatever you want to call it. They're not done yet. That's what you're saying.
No, but mine is working title is Navajo Ranger. And I'm hoping to have a really handsome guy, even better looking than me, with a Smokey the Bear hat shading his eyes.
Uh-huh.
And underneath it'll say the true story of the real Jim Chi.
Okay.
Well, I can't wait to read
I
it.
know. Hurry up on those other 32 chapters or whatever you've got left.
Yeah.
You got to be quick.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I can't wait. Honestly, I can't wait to see what
Oh
you come up with.
yeah. No, the perspective that you two have brought is very very unique, I think. And Gwen was exactly right that you're very credible and very down to earth and definitely have the background to, support what you're telling us. As amazing as some of it sounds, because you kind of covered some real amazing stuff, coins out of nowhere and knives flying across the room and UFOs and missing time and all that. But for some reason, hearing you two talk about that, it makes it very easy to believe. And I'm sure you have so much more to tell people about and so much more detail. And we'll look forward to those books in the future. Hopefully they'll come soon. But I want to say thank you to Gwen for her inaugural interview here. She picked a great duo. But also, of course, thank you to Stan and John. And we'd like to have you back at some point. I know you have a busy schedule. You're going everywhere doing interviews and TV shows, apparently. We're small time compared to Netflix, but I hope we ask some different kinds of questions and let you, riff a little bit more than you might have gotten in a half an hour TV show or something like that. But we'll look forward to seeing what you guys produce next, and hope you have a good night to all three of you. We'll hope to see you again.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Gwen.
guys.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Lots of fun.
Good night.
It was great.
Lots of fun.